From Phoenix, Arizona, or should I say beautiful Phoenix, Arizona, it's the Neglected News Report. I'm your co-host, Scott Mitchell, here with my brother, Kevin.
Welcome to Arizona, now technically the 31st state to legalize gay marriage.
And we will get into that, I'm sure, by the end of the show. But I had to qualify and say beautiful Phoenix, Arizona, because it is absolutely gorgeous out here. I don't think it got more than, what was the high yesterday, maybe 84?
It hasn't even been getting in the 90s. Yep.
Yeah, which is good because I got yard work to do. The mornings are just, it's almost chilly in the mornings.
Chamber of Commerce weather.
Chamber of Commerce.
That's what they call it. Because when people see it on TV, it's good for business because people move out and they move out to Arizona.
That's true. And the mornings have been, I get up at like 5 a.m. during the week, and I sleep with a fan blowing even during the winter. And it's getting kind of cold in the mornings with that fan blowing on me. Anyway, hope everyone had a good week. I'm just glad it's over. It was kind of a rough week to get through.
The stock market was up and down, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. It still finished down for the week. Recovered some of it yesterday.
Yeah, it ended up being pretty much of a wash, though. The roller coaster ride. It was down at one point, I think, on Wednesday, 400 points. Kind of
a wash, kind of like the economic recovery.
But again, I'm very suspicious of it. I think the Fed likes to dump a lot of printed money into it when it sees the market going down. I think they artificially pump money into it. That's what they've been doing since 2008.
That's what they do whenever they see anything. It's always throw money at it or print more money because of it.
That's why it's not real.
And you see, I keep telling people at work, why are you investing in the stock market? You're just, it's going to fall apart. Well, this one guy invests short term, and then as soon as he hits a level where he thinks it's peaked, he cashes out.
All that has to happen is the right time for them to come in and pull the plug. They could pull the plug on this economy at any time because it's built on nothing. No thing.
And you should qualify that with an adjective. Purposely.
It is purposely. Right now they're waiting for the perfect time. See that again? It sounds conspiratorial, but the one world government can't be a one world government with an America, with a strong United States, both economically, spiritually, morally, and a people that has a strong, vibrant constitution.
Here's why. Okay, we were built upon liberty and freedom. Equal rights for all. There are other countries in the world that are built on that right now, but the difference is we can back it up. At least now we can, to a certain degree. But that ability to back things up and keep it in force is dwindling daily.
Now, the reason why the stock market was jittery this week was not only because of Ebola, but because of the European economic situation. They're getting ready to go. If it wasn't for Germany, the euro would be...
I was about to ask you about Germany, how they're doing.
The euro would be nowhere. But Germany's like the rich uncle. Everybody comes and borrows money from him. He's getting to the point where it's like, I don't got any money left in my checking account. Sorry.
And here's I think that a lot of that goes back to the way they look at themselves through history. Germans look at themselves as this whole thing with this master race with Hitler. That played upon something that was ingrained and inbred into the Germans.
Extremely pragmatic.
They think that they are the ones that are meant to be head and shoulders above everyone else in the world, are meant to rule the world. That's why I always make a joke. Why does it sound like whenever a German says anything, no matter how whatever the intention is, it could be a love poem or whatever, they always sound like they want to take over the world?
But they do everything well. I spent 2 years there. Their engineering is superb.
They have pride, if nothing else.
Here's a good example of the German, I don't know, what do you call it, discipline. I was on basically an not abandoned street, a desolate street one gray, cloudy, which is typical of Germany, day. And I was sitting at a crosswalk, waiting to cross this very narrow road. Maybe the road was 20 feet wide. And I was waiting for the crosswalk to allow me to cross. Finally, I had enough. And there was a woman and her child standing next to me. Finally, I just said, you know what? There's not a car in sight. So I crossed the crosswalk against, the walk light. Well, I'd gotten about 100 yards and I hear footsteps running up to me, and it's the lady and her with her child in tow, barely holding on to her hand. And she got up to me and she said, "How dare you?" I said, "How dare I what?" She said, "You Americans are all alike. You never pay attention to rules." I said, "What do you mean? That light, you walked when you shouldn't have. You never do that in front of a child." And I was like, really?
You know what?
That's typical. That's very German.
That's like leftists. It's always about the letter of the law and never the spirit of the law. They're okay with the letter of the law, but not the spirit of the law.
Yeah, but as far as the European economy, once that goes, it's just the house of cards is just going to start
dominoes.
Yeah,
dominoes are going to start falling,
and everyone points at China. China's a paper tiger. They're if they don't have the rest of the world to sell their goods to, they're gone too.
I hate to say who I think is going to come out on top in all this.
Russia.
Exactly.
Whoever has the gold. Although China's buying a lot of gold, and so is Russia right now. Yeah. We probably don't have any.
And we probably lost or spent Germany's gold that they were keeping in our hands for safekeeping.
We got all this going on in the world. There's a lot of, everywhere you turn, it's like, you're getting pummeled from one end to the next.
Yep.
And again, one of my Facebook friends posts this anonymous, this post aimed at probably people like me who actually post, real world items. And she was talking about all of our negativity and if we should try being positive for one day, and it would be good for our karma and blah, 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 blah. Who died and made you king of social media? Whoever said that Facebook was just a forum to post your whatever you ate that day or whatever your dog did that day or whatever. Who died and left you king?
It's not to say that people don't have the freedom to do that, but when you say that's all Facebook is about, you've lost the whole point of Facebook.
I looked back at my postings. I'd say less than 50% of my postings are even political. And the only reason I post political posts is because I feel that the world is rapidly changing in a negative direction and nobody is paying attention. And it's my way of screaming, wake up.
That's right. It's all sunshine and lollipops to those people, and I bet they see unicorns on every corner.
If Nazi Germany had Facebook in the 1930s, maybe none of this would have maybe none of what they went through would have happened. Maybe people would have got together and said, that Adolf Hitler, he's kind of nuts.
But
and they, after the Reichstag was burned down, maybe some of the people in the know would have said, what, that was a false flag. Actually, it wasn't the communists who burnt down the Reichstag; it was the Nazis, and that's how they got into power.
Because it was all planned, and the Nazis were right there to start blaming the communists right away, and they rounded up a few hundred of them and executed them the next day.
The night of the long knives.
Exactly.
So anyway, hey, what do you think of that Houston mayor? What's her name? Anise Parker. In case any of you don't know who Anise Parker is, she's the first openly gay mayor of Houston, maybe of any major city. Is that correct?
I believe she might be.
Well, anyway, she said she ordered subpoenas issued to 5 local pastors that demand, in quotations, all speeches, presentations, or sermons related to the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance. The petition, Mayor Anise Parker, homosexuality or gender identity prepared by, delivered by, revised by, or approved by you or in your possession. Among other demands, communication between the pastors and their congregants, including Facebook messages and text messages, and between the pastors and their attorneys. First Amendment protections, attorney-client privilege. Parker's legal team has run roughshod all over everybody's rights, in other words. Now this is, liberals are always complaining about their First Amendment. This attacks the First Amendment, both in freedom of speech and establishment clause. It is case textbook of what an attack on the First Amendment is. Textbook. It doesn't get any clearer than this. Yet nobody seems to really. Let's put it this way. I don't see Eric Holder marching into Houston and demanding Miss Anise Parker to cease and subsist.
Keep talking. I'm reading something here. There might be a development here in this.
Well, they came back and said, okay, we're going to narrow it down. We don't want your sermons. We just want your speeches. Can someone please tell me the difference between a sermon or a speech? Sermon or a speech? Isn't a sermon religious speech? I'm guessing. I mean,
I think for anyone who's sane, you can see where it's a violation of the First Amendment in that it's a violation of free speech. But for the Establishment Clause, let me clarify that. The Establishment Clause of the First Amendment says the government shall not basically start a religion. And you may not think that them seizing these pastors' sermons or, quote, speeches is establishment of a religion. If the government is saying that we have to read it over before you can give this speech or sermon, it is. They're saying what they can and can't say. This is not unlike what Hitler did with the churches in World War II, prior to World War II.
Isn't that like the creation of free speech zones?
Exactly. What's this free speech zone? You're supposed to have free speech everywhere you go. The thing about it is, and I even go further on this myself. Why is the Supreme Court ruling on something that the 10th Amendment doesn't even give them the power to establish in the first place? The federal government established in the first place. They are not empowered. The federal government is not empowered to have anything to do with
gay marriage. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, yeah, I'm thinking about the gay marriage thing. Sorry. Never mind. I'm getting off on a tangent. Sorry.
The thing about gay marriage is Arizona voted against it. It's like, I think
so did every other state.
2/3 to 1/3. You know, it doesn't matter what the people want anymore. You get it? It's the elites. It's the black-robed dictators that make law.
And I bet you 80 to 95% of you out there, 80 to 90%, let's say, are going to say, well, we're getting down on homos, or, oops, I shouldn't have said that. They're getting down on gays. Well, that's not what I'm talking about. It doesn't matter where you fall on this. It is just a blatant, when the Supreme Court rules on these things that people have passed, the people pass them because there's no provision to have them passed by the federal government. And what does the 10th Amendment say? These are enumerated powers or for the federal government to enforce and to create and blah, 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 blah. If they are not on this list of things that are put forth in this document known as the U.S. Constitution, they are reserved for the states or the people.
What president was the first to start really politicizing the courts? You remember?
It was probably FDR.
Exactly. He packed it.
Yeah, he did.
He had litmus tests.
And here's the thing about the Supreme Court: it does not. There's no limit on the number of courts of judges or justices that can be appointed. So he had I think up to 13, didn't he?
I don't know how many. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, he did. There's no limit on the number of justices at all. But my point is many of these issues that the Supreme Court rules on, or any federal court rules on, for that matter, I'm not going to even go as high as the Supreme Court, none of them, the majority of the cases nowadays have nothing to do with things that the federal government has the power to pass or should have any say in the first place, based on the Constitution. You know, the federal government should have nothing to do with ruling on gay marriage. They should have nothing to do with ruling on abortion.
But we have strayed so far from our founding fathers in everything that I don't know. We've gone so far that I don't know that there's any turning back. And a good example, this is a good example of liberals being not liberals. Liberals aren't liberals. They are far from liberal. They are leftist ideologues. They tend to be tyrannical. Look at this. This is a woman who basically says, I'm gonna subpoena everything, you say, everything you do, everything you write, and if I don't like it, I may jail you. Does anybody find that frightening?
I do. And by the way, I want to apologize for me coming off saying homo. I was speaking as if it was someone. I was speaking as a character, not as myself. I was speaking as if someone was. Forget it. It's going to be lost on you progressives anyway. It doesn't matter.
Homo is just short for homosexual, and
yeah.
And even progressives find homosexual to be offensive, even though it's just descriptive.
But
I'm a heterosexual.
But by the same token, what do the homosexuals call us? We're breeders. But guess what?
We don't
find it offensive.
It doesn't matter what you say. It just matters who's saying it. You get it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's fine for blacks to call each other the N-word or call white people crackers, but you can't the other way around. It just all depends on who's saying it. Basically, a white man can't say anything.
As an example,
a white male.
Let me tell you something. As an example, I have a friend that used to be on. I used to have her on my friends list on Facebook. She dropped me because. Or no, she didn't drop me because, well, she didn't agree with my politics, so she dropped me. Wow, big deal. But
coward.
But if I posted anything by certain news outlets or people, such as Rush Limbaugh or Fox News or Sean Hannity, doesn't matter how much truth was in it, she refused to read it, and she dismissed it as, oh no, that's a bunch of garbage, it's a lie. Just because of the messenger.
And she probably posts things by the Huffington Post.
Exactly. Huffington Post, Daily Kos.
Yeah. But,
it depends on the messenger.
The best way to deal with progressives, liberals, whatever you want to call them, is to get right back in their face, because you know what ends up happening? They end up unfriending you or just not talking to you anymore.
Exactly.
Because they're used to controlling the whole conversation and to browbeating you, calling you names.
They're used to being not being challenged.
I was debating last week 2 lawyers at the same time on a subject on Facebook, and it only took about two statements by me before the ad hominems began. He started simply by calling me, "Hey, buddy," and then it progressively got worse, and he started calling me stupid, uninformed. Of course, it doesn't take them very long before you start pushing their buttons. You know why? They're not used to being challenged. People like Scott and I have been challenged our whole lives because we grew up in institutions run by liberals. Schools, workplace, if you work for a corporation, that's politically correct. Everything you see on TV, the news you read, everything is liberal. So they're not used to being questioned because it's always been their way or the highway. And the minute you start showing, a different way of thinking, oh boy.
I would go so far as to say I think the reason why we're conservative as we are is because we were challenged. Because we'd start thinking, well, maybe they're right, maybe I'm wrong. Let me go research it. Find out the truth by reading, people.
Yeah.
I would venture to say that's a component.
But the problem is that they're in charge now so much, government, and schools.
But you know what? I honestly believe there's more of us than there are of them.
Entertainment.
But we have allowed them to take control.
Well, there's only so many of us, Scott.
I know.
I mean, when you got people like this on Facebook that are admonishing me because I'm standing up, come on, what do you expect? There's not. People's priorities are screwed up. Is what I'm trying to say.
And the thing about it is in order for it to change, it's got to happen person by person on one basis.
This is kind of a decent segue. I want to read you a poem that was written in 1919 by Rudyard Kipling, who wrote Gunga Din for
the Jungle Book.
Yeah, Jungle
stories.
Book. And it's very relevant. It was very relevant then as it is now because we find ourselves very close. See, this was written right after World War I.
Yep.
1919. And let me explain. It's called The Gods of the Copybook Headings. And let me give you an introduction before I read the poem to you. The Gods of the Copybook Headings is a poem published by Rudyard Kipling in 1919, which was purported to have age-old, unfashionable wisdom that Kipling saw as having been forgotten by society and replaced by habits of wishful thinking. The copybook headings to which the title refers were proverbs or maxims extolling virtues such as honesty or fair dealing that were printed at the tops of the pages of 19th century British student special notebook pages called copybooks. The school children had to write them by hand repeatedly down the page. So basically what the copybooks were common sense. They were like fables. Remember Aesop's fables? It's age-old wisdom that like Aesop would make fables to make a point, like the boy who cried wolf. Eventually people are not going to listen to you anymore if you cry wolf. And this is basically what the copybook headings were. And I want to read this to you because I think it's very pertinent. And I hope I don't bore you, but it should only take about 5 minutes. Starts out, as I pass through my incarnations in every age and race, I make my proper prostrations to the gods of the marketplace. Peering through reverent fingers, I watch them flourish and fall, and the gods of the copybook headings, I notice, outlast them all. We were living in trees when they met us. They showed us each other in turn that water would certainly wet us, as fire would certainly burn. But we found them lacking in uplift, vision, and breadth of mind, so we left them to teach the gorillas while we followed the march of mankind. We moved as a spirit listed, they never altered their pace, being neither cloud nor windborne like the gods of the marketplace, but they always caught up with our progressive, and presently word would come that a tribe had been wiped off its ice field or the lights had gone out in Rome. With the hopes that our world is built on, they were utterly out of touch. They denied that the moon was Stilton. They denied she was even Dutch. They denied that wishes were horses. They denied that a pig had wings. So we worshiped the gods of the market, who promised these beautiful things. When the Cambrian measures were forming, they promised perpetual peace. They swore if we gave them our weapons, that the wars of the tribes would cease. But when we disarmed, they sold us and delivered us bound to our foe. And the gods of the copybook headings said, stick to the devil you know. On the first Feminian sandstones, we were promised the fuller life, which started by loving our neighbor and ended by loving his wife. Till our women had no more children and the men lost reason and faith, and the gods of the copybook headings said, the wages of sin is death. In the Carboniferous epoch, we were promised abundance for all, by robbing selected Peter to pay for collective Paul. But though we had plenty of money, there was nothing our money could buy, and the gods of the copybook headings said, if you don't work, you die. Then the gods of the market tumbled, and their smooth-tongued wizards withdrew, and the hearts of the meanest were humbled, and began to believe it was true, that all is not gold that glitters, and two make 4, and the gods of the copybook headings limped up to explain it once more. As it will be in the future, it was at the birth of man. There are only 4 things certain since social progress began, that the dog returns to his vomit, and the sow returns to her mire, and the burnt fool's bandaged finger goes wobbling back to the fire. And that after this is accomplished, and the brave new world begins, when all men are paid for existing, and no man must pay for his sins. And surely as water will wet us, and surely as fire will burn, the gods of the copybook headings with terror and slaughter return. What that's saying is the minute we veer from the truth, and we know the truth, and don't buy this bull that truth is relative and it's one person's
Your
truth is another. That's garbage.
Mm-hmm.
That's sophistry. That's total bunk. And that's what this is saying. It says, as sure as water will wet us and as sure as fire will burn us. But when we forget that, what happens? We put our finger in the fire. And you know what happens? It burns. And that's what happens when we forget common sense. And you want to know what? Some people don't like this. That's what the Bible is, by the way. The Bible's just saying, hey, look, you do this, you do that, you do the other thing, bad things are going to happen. And it's not always God's wrath or his judgment. It's, they're just commonsensical. Do you know that the Jewish kosher diet was basically, it's a health matter. Mm-hmm. That all they were saying in the Old Testament was, look, you take care of this, you take care of your health by not refrigerating or cooking certain foods together. You know, it's just, and it wasn't just because God's saying this. He wants us to be happy. He wants us to live healthfully. You know, this is what, you know, these are guidelines. And that's all this is God's the copybook heading saying. Look, you lose your common sense, bad things, slaughter. And this was written right after World War I. And that's what this is about.
Just about 100 years ago.
Yeah, we lost our way. And you know what? We've lost it again.
And what I also took it to mean toward the end, it says that after we've done our thing for a while, the gods of the copybook headings come back and say, "See, I told you so. This is how it should be." You go through cycles like this.
And did you notice he even used the word progressive?
Yep. But I think that this cycle we're going through now is going to have, folks, unless something's done quick, and I think it might be too late already.
Okay.
I think we're going to go through a really, really dark period for a really, really long time.
Well, tell me, this is something that's happening right now is a perfect example of the gods of the copybook headings. Why isn't Barack Obama shutting down flights from West Africa?
It's not part of his plan.
What sense does it make to continue to allow flights coming in from Liberia, Ivory Coast, what are the other countries? Sierra Leone. Why are we allowing that? Not because, we would shut them down, not because we're racist, not because we're mean, not because we want to shut down their economies, although I don't know what kind of economies they do have. But it makes no sense. What's it going to take?
It doesn't make sense, and that's what makes me believe it's a part of a plan of his. And it's an evil plan. I don't care what anyone says. He's evil.
Just because it's nonsensical. Frieden gets up there the other day. They asked him the same question. And you know what his answer was? Because then the outbreak will spread faster. Wait, hold on. It'll spread faster maybe in Africa, but it won't spread here.
But then he went around and said, then we don't allow flights out of these countries. And then Megyn Kelly said to him, we're not talking about flights into those countries. We're not talking about flights into them. We're talking about flights out of them to the U.S.
If you want to go there, fine. But if you want to come back, you might have to sit in a month of isolation.
And then what he says, we got to have commercial flights because charter flights they're not the same. They can't work. Why can't they? Like Megyn Kelly said, they fly in, they fly out. What's the difference? Then
Glenn Beck interviewed this other guy from the CDC and asked him the same question. And he said, as far as, not allowing people to leave there, he came up with this metaphor. He said, supposing a country decided that because America has such a high crime rate that we were not going to allow Americans to fly into our country because crime will increase then. And Glenn said, criminals aren't contagious. You can't catch criminality. You either are one or you're not.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it was and the guy had no answer.
It's a choice.
It's a terrible, comparison.
It's a choice. To be a criminal is a choice. To contract Ebola is not a choice.
Exactly.
You're exposed to it, you get it.
Ebola doesn't care. It just wants a warm body.
It's no respecter of persons.
And people understand this. As bad as the Black Death was in the Middle Ages, Ebola is horrific. Mm-hmm. Your organs literally turn to mush. You bleed out. It's said that was it the Washington Post? I forgot who wrote the article the last few days of Duncan. What was Duncan's name? The guy. What?
Arnie Duncan?
No, the guy who brought the Ebola. Mr. Duncan, the African.
I forgot.
Anyway, his last name was Duncan. And they said that there were soaked sheets, linens, towels, blankets, full of his diarrhea, his vomit, his blood.
Eric Duncan.
They were stacked as high as the ceiling, and that was one person. If you want to see hell on earth, if that breaks out in the United States, this is biblical. That's Revelations right there.
I know.
I'm sorry, but you couldn't dream up of a more horrific way to die. If I had it, and I would consider putting a bullet in my head, actually.
They say there's two ways you die: from dehydration due to the excessive diarrhea, or you can't breathe. You just can't breathe.
And have you seen some? They don't show these pictures very often, but have you seen some of the ulcers on the skin?
No.
It's incredible. It's just awful. I don't think you could dream up a worse way to die.
Let's find some of these pictures.
Yeah, they're just awful. So we're Water wets us, fire burns us. Mr. Obama, you don't close the borders, we get Ebola. Plain and simple. I mean, it's not a tough concept. You know, how many people are flying into the United States from West Africa on a daily basis? Let's say there's 100. What do you think out of those 100, how many do you think have been actually subjected to the Ebola virus?
What did I say earlier this week to you? I said that they're doing with Ebola what they did with AIDS. It's a disease that's starting to be granted human rights. Rush used to say that about AIDS.
But that's leftist. They make no sense. Did you hear Obama said that he, to allay everybody's fears about Ebola, that he hugged and kissed one of what was it, one of the sick people, or what?
I don't remember.
No. It was one of the caregivers at the hospital that had been taking care of Mr. Duncan. And he just approved that there's nothing to fear. Oh boy. I wonder how Michelle feels about that. Brock. Yeah. Wonder how your daughters feel about that. Yep. You know,
Sasha, yeah.
We're not, sometimes things need to be stigmatized. You know, during the Dark Ages, during the Black Plague, people made some really brutal decisions back then, because it's either life or there's death.
Yep. I'm looking at pictures of people with Ebola, and the lesions on the skin are not pretty. They look like giant brown blisters.
They're bleeding. They're literally bleeding under their skin. It's just,
yeah.
You know, and I don't know. I wouldn't play with this. I'm not saying that it's going to take off here, but why?
Why take a chance?
Why tempt the
devil? Because
devil?
what is it that happens with viruses? They eventually do what? They eventually mutate. Who's to say this mutation, first of all, mutates into something that we can't treat like we've been able to do for the most part so far? Or what if it mutates into a form where it's airborne?
The second nurse who contracted Ebola can't even tell you. She said, I don't remember touching anything with my skin that was contaminated. I don't know how I got it.
I don't think the first one remembers either. But what is the CDC and the government doing? They're throwing them under the bus and saying it's because probably they didn't take the proper precautions. Although the story has been coming out this week at many hospitals that they've learned and the one in Dallas has been saying they were learning as they go.
Does it surprise you that the administration would throw anybody under the bus?
No, not at all. And it's like they're learning as they go. I mean, come on.
You know, again, I hate to say it, but it's a biblical disease. I'm sorry. When they talk about disease, I couldn't dream up of something as horrific as that.
And it's right out of a Stephen King novel. And if you don't believe me, folks, read The Stand. The Stand. And this is interesting for Stephen King too, because not only is it about a virus that was a flu virus that was produced in a government laboratory that they tried to keep secret until one of the subjects contracted it and broke out with his family and then started spreading across the country. But
Captain Trips.
It kills 99.4% of the U.S. population. I was just doing my research on it this morning because it's been a while since I've read it. And not only that, but there's a spiritual component to it, which is something you don't always see in Stephen King's novels. You have a good guy that basically is personification of the devil, and you have a woman who is a personification of God. So it becomes a whole spiritual thing, too, which is unusual for Stephen King.
And if you don't think your government is capable of developing something like that, you better think again. Do you know that there was a lot of historians out there that believe that the Spanish flu of 1918 was made in a laboratory here in the United States?
And like Kevin said, if you don't think your government's capable of doing that, let me ask you this. What makes our government so different than governments in the past who have seized power and become totalitarian? You got to remember one thing, folks, and I think too many people forget this, and it's within recent history. By recent, I mean the last 100 years, but Hitler was elected to office.
Yes, he was. And there are a group of people out there. Call them what I'm not even going to name names, but there are people out there that really thinks our population should be culled. Queen Elizabeth's husband, what's his name?
Prince Philip.
Prince Philip. He made a famous comment once. He said, "If I could come back in my next life, I would come back as a killer virus and wipe out 3/4 of the world's population." That's loose.
Nice guy. But and he's someone we call a friend.
See, the elites in this world view you and I as completely separate from them. They're not. When Bill Gates sits there and talks, we talked about this last week when he talks about lowering the population. He's not talking about himself. Come on. He's talking about the unwashed masses.
And they think they think this way because they think they're better than the rest of us, whether it's because of their education or their social standing or because they're rich, it doesn't matter. They think they're better than the rest of us. If you don't have to look very far. If you want to see someone who's on the low end of that scale of elitism, look at Hollywood. They don't have, they got fame. They got, when it comes to riches, yeah, they got more than us. They don't have as much as some of these people do. These world leaders and stuff and giants of industry, but they got enough to where they can look down their nose at us. And we feed them. We give them the money.
Listening to
that they made their fortunes on.
Frieden from the CDC talk. Is there something bizarre about him? He has this monotone, certain cadence to his speech. I think
he's hopped up on goofballs.
I don't know, but the whole thing is weird and bizarre. First of all, them not shutting down flights from West Africa, and then the explanations they come up with. None of it makes sense until you start looking at it in a quote-unquote conspiratorial mind, which would say unless they really want the disease to spread. Because when you start thinking that way, then everything makes sense. Yeah. When you start thinking about, the government wants to prevent the spread of this disease, that's when it doesn't make sense because, well, then if you want to spread, you don't want the disease to spread, then you wouldn't allow it here in this country. It makes no sense, but it only makes sense when you flip it on its ear. That's why I say everything I'm told these days, I do a 180 to get to the truth because there's so much deception. Up is down, down is up, black is white, and white is black.
And I defy anyone to come up with another explanation for that, other than
unless Obama really sees himself as a citizen of the world and thinks that what's good for the geese is good for the gander. In other words, hey, if they're going to get sick and die in West Africa, they can get sick and die in Alabama and Massachusetts and Arizona. Who are we? Are we any better than the rest of the world? Well, that's sick too. So I don't know which is. He's the president of the United States. He's not king of the world. His job is to protect his citizens, and he's not doing that right now. As a matter of fact, he's imperiling them.
Yep. I'm going to go back to this. There's one phrase that I think is overused, and that is, we can't put our young men and women in the armed services in harm's way. That's their job. But I'm sorry. I've had this argument with someone who's somewhat of a pacifist. It is their job. I'm not saying that it's their job to go and die. I say it's their job that if they have to go into harm's way and possibly may die, that is their job.
I wouldn't send my son to any of these wars we're fighting right now.
Right. But, I mean, would you agree? They sign up for it. They sign up for it knowing that they might have to put their life on the line someday. Now, that being said, that's their job. It is not the job of the American people to have their lives put in harm's way. The citizens of this country. That's why we have an army, to ensure that we, the average citizen, doesn't have to have their lives imperiled.
Now, granted, most of the vocal disapproval going on is probably coming from, the political right. However, the left is getting nervous. A few more cases start spreading, head to the mountains.
O'Reilly made a comment last night. If there's one more death from this, he's going to have to have a ban on flights.
Oh, and by the way, what's the?
I think the uproar would be so great.
What's the guy he appointed the Ebola czar? Klein.
Klain, Klain.
Yeah, Klein. Yeah, there. If you notice, he doesn't have a doctor before his name or an MD after his name. You know what his claim to fame is? He was a chief of staff for Al Gore and Joe Biden, and his big accomplishment was he helped with the high-tech lynching of Clarence Thomas, his Supreme Court nomination in the early 1990s. That's his claim to fame. He's a party hack. He's a Democrat party hack who has no experience in the medical field, and he's just it's political cronyism at its worst.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't need an Ebola czar. We got the CDC, we got the National Institute of Health,
But his job is to coordinate it all, don't you know?
It's a good example. Washington D.C. is out of control.
It's the same situation that the 9/11 Commission came up with when you had this wall erected between the various intelligence agencies. They don't talk to each other. Same thing that's going on right now.
It's just a bunch of pencil necks, a bunch of pointy-head geeks sitting there talking, navel-gazing and talking to one another.
You know what they are? They're like a virus. What's a virus's...
Worthless.
What is a virus's purpose in life? It's to keep itself alive and perpetuate its species.
Exactly.
What do the different agencies in government do? Perpetuate them. They live to perpetuate their species.
Try to make a payroll one day,
jobs.
dude. Try to actually create a job.
So that's why a lot of them are more concerned about how it's going to affect them politically and economically, rather than how it's going to affect the country as a whole. You know, and that's what happens when you have a bloated bureaucracy who aren't elected or responsible for anyone.
Do you know,
or anything.
I talked to a buddy of mine who went to Washington, D.C. during the height of our recession, although I believe we're still in one. But, and he went back to Washington, D.C., and he's from Washington, D.C., and you know what he said? He said, you wouldn't believe Washington's booming. Of course it's booming. Because it's taking all the people's money. And he said there's new building going on. There's cranes all over the place building buildings. And yeah, well, you know, look how we're doing here in Phoenix, Arizona, where the housing atomic bomb exploded. Mm-hmm. We had, I'm a realtor, so I know, we had whole streets empty of houses. And not whole streets, but, you know, every other house was empty. There was a for sale sign on it.
And here's something else. And while all this is happening, before I even bought my house, I'm like looking at the prices of some of these houses and I'm saying, how is that valued at whatever price it was valued at? Then I bought my house 5 years ago, a little over 5 years ago. They're asking $90,000 for it. Kevin made him an offer for me for $95,000. We paid him $95,000. It had been worth $180,000 just 2 years before this. I went and checked it. You know what it's worth now? $133,000 just 5 years later. What does that tell you? Prices do not naturally go up, or values of homes do not naturally go up that quickly.
Oh, I can go into it, but I don't want to deviate as to what.
What I'm saying is it's artificial.
They control
it's artificial.
They control the supply is what they do.
Let me tell you something else. Back in the 30s and 40s, after FDR got elected president, do you know what he did? I read this. It's a book called The Forgotten Man by Amity Shlaes, who is a writer for Newsweek. Anyway, she writes that FDR and his Treasury Secretary at the time, who I think was Morgenthau, yeah, they would sit there and they literally would sit across the table at breakfast and say, what do you think we should put the price of gold at today?
Yeah.
Honestly, I mean, it's in there.
Well, just real quick, this will take about 60 seconds. It'll explain to you why the housing market came back. The banks repoed millions and millions of houses. What did they do with them? Well, they put some of them back on the market, but a big majority of them they sat on. It's called shadow inventory. And why did they sit on them? Because they wanted to drive up demand. If they were to release all the properties, the values would crash because there would be so many of them.
Even further.
Yeah, but we would have been out of the problem, that much quicker. The question was, should we just, cut to the quick and just swallow the bitter pill and get done with it? Or should we create an artificial market and let it go on for 5 years, 6 years, or however long it's been. And that's what they did. It's called shadow inventory. Look it up. So anyway, that's government. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac for the most part. FHA, HUD. I want to read you. This week, Scott, remember that the Democrats started playing politics with Ebola, saying that the CDC had the CDC gotten the money that it needed because of the evil Republicans, and then Ebola would have been eradicated.
Well, they are changing their tactics. They're not blaming George Bush; they're blaming the evil Republicans.
I mean, how shameless can you get? But hold on, let me get a drink of water. There's an article. This is, I believe, from the National Review, and it talks about some of the way the CDC spends its money. These are funny things here. They spent $15 billion. Well, first of all, let me first of all arrest the notion that that any of their budget was cut between 2000 and 2014. CDC outlays almost doubled into 2014 constant dollars, from $3.5 billion to $6.8 billion. Outlays have dipped the last few years, but that's after a Bush-Obama spending boom. CDC outlays have quadrupled in constant dollars since the late 1980s. So it's totally erroneous, fallacious, and I'll tell you what the CDC really spends their money on. $15 billion telling taxpayers how to eat. Yep. They wanted, this is Michelle Obama,
I don't know. I don't need to be told how to eat. I see food. I pick it up. I eat it.
Yeah. They also gave $90 million grant money to China. The NIH awarded more than $90 million to Chinese researchers. This included $2 million to develop a vaccine for a parasite disease common in China. The Traditional Values Coalition asked, as our country heads to fiscal ruin, why are we giving millions in taxpayer dollars to Chinese science, which benefits China and its institutions, when they hold more than $1 trillion in American debt? Good question. This is stuff your CDC spends its money on. They spent $22 million on duplicate agricultural programs. I love this one. $2.87 million on why are lesbians fat? That's one question NHA has decided to research for the past 4 years, spending more than $2.87 million on. So far on the project, the ongoing minority sexual orientation, the ongoing study is meant to explain why women of minority sexual orientation are disproportionately affected by the obesity epidemic. It's like you catch it, right?
Yeah,
the obesity epidemic.
I don't know.
Here's one, Scott, that's not in this list. But CDC actually did a study that proved that monkeys that can hurl their poop the farthest.
Yes, I heard about that.
Are smarter and can communicate better.
Yeah, I heard that. What I'm wondering is, where's the study on transgender women who are still afraid of the bike bar? Where's the study on that?
Promoting the HPV vaccine for young girls. $544,000 for a study on how to boost the number of young girls getting human papillomavirus vaccination in Los Angeles County, although CDC... Go ahead.
But wasn't Rick Perry criticized for that in Texas for passing that on a state level?
Yeah, he was criticized by Republicans. So.
Okay, but point has to be made. It got done on a state level.
And apparently the CDC loves studying monkeys because they spent $3.2 million getting monkeys drunk just to see what would happen. The agency apparently has quite a fascination with excessive drinking, since it also doled out money in recent years for research on binge drinking mice, inebriated gamblers, and pilots seeking the sensation of flying drunk.
Well, you know what would happen to the monkeys that got drunk? You know what would happen if they got them drunk? The ones that were smarter would fling their poo with less accuracy.
They also spent $1.5 million on bizarre sex studies. They spent $1.45 million to spend on 4 obscure sex studies. One's called Mood Arousal and Sexual Risk-Taking. Another was called Study on Sexual Habits of Older Men. Another was called Study on San Francisco's Asian prostitutes / masseuses.
What?
And Study on American Indian Transgender Research. Okay, so this is, you wonder why we don't have gone nowhere on Ebola? Okay, they spent $1.4 million on funds for homosexual activists in public schools. CDC gave the Gay and Lesbian and Straight Education Network, the homosexual, $1.4 million to create safe spaces in public schools. The funding will be distributed during a 5-year period and targets 20 school districts, blah, 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 blah.
Do you know why I know why the funding has been going on these worthless programs by any agency. It's because of baseline spending. You go back to they're complaining that their funding
use it or lose it.
Yeah, the whole thing about it is they got to use their budget every year or lose it. They won't get an increase, and that's what they're saying in the CDC. It's not that their budget hasn't gone up. They're complaining because the rate of increase has gone down.
Exactly.
And that's baseline spending. If you don't spend what your budget is, it's like a nonprofit.
That's what Washington considers a tax cut, is not real cuts. Like last year we spent $100 million. This year we're spending $99 million. It's a spending cut in Washington is just a decrease in the increase, in the rate of increase. That's what it is. That's what baseline budgeting is. Yeah. And that's Washington thing.
It's also known as deficit spending because we don't have the money for it anyway.
Yeah, but see, we're living this fantasy. We're spending money that doesn't even exist.
It's because people, if people were to take the time to learn what these phrases mean and then investigate it from there, here's a challenge I throw out to people. Don't go investigating necessarily the issues. First, determine the definitions of these terms and words, and then from there, see how it applies to what's going on around you.
This is a perfect segue for what you just said, Scott. They gave $2.6 million for Centers for Gun Disease Prevention. Gun disease. Is it not gum, like gum disease, like periodontal?
Gun like bang bang.
Gun disease. It's a study, it's a study that seemed to favor greater gun control when Congress finally defunded it in 1999. Apparently Congress thought CDC had more important issues to study, like how to control actual diseases. Yeah. And then only to come back in 2009 to create the National Institute of Gun Control. This is the CDC, $5 million. Here's a good, Scott, this is just so sweet. $181,406 on how cocaine enhances the Japanese quail's sex drive. No joke. It was a for real study. Why quail? Because quail provide a convenient and interesting alternative to standard laboratory rats and pigeons.
Okay. So they want to do a study on Japanese birds to see how cocaine affects their ability to turn Japanese.
That's racial.
No, it's not.
Okay. Empowering women to choose contraception in jail. Okay.
Yeah.
That they spent $279,000 some odd dollars on empowering. I love that term. That's another government empowering. I hate that word.
Another phrase I hate. Raising awareness.
Empowering women to choose contraception in jail. I don't even need to say anything about that, right? Do I?
Nope.
Okay. Bogus AIDS experiments. They funded almost $5 million. It says results of an HIV/AIDS vaccine study funded by NIH were faked by researchers at the Iowa State University, calling into question $19 million in grants. They awarded the same researcher over the years inauthentic samples throughout a period of 4 years, made the vaccine reportedly appear far more effective than it actually was. Okay, study on sex workers spreading STDs. That was awarded $675,000. And examining barriers to correct condom use. $423,000. Doesn't that only take a banana? Banana and a condom?
Yeah, pretty much.
Don't our kids learn that in kindergarten?
Okay, what's wrong with that statement? Don't our kids learn that in kindergarten?
Well,
I know that the problem is should they be learning it in kindergarten by someone other than their parents? I don't think so.
But like Scott said earlier, he said that government's like a parasite. Its job is self-perpetuation.
Like a virus.
It's self-perpetuation. No matter how ludicrous, no matter how absurd.
What did Ronald Reagan say? The closest thing to eternal life that we have on this planet is a government program.
Yeah, once Congress appropriates money for something, try taking it away. You want to hear a pig squeal?
Oh, yeah. They won't.
But the day the dollar crashes, it's a game changer. Everything changes. Everything.
And you know what? I was just thinking about this, too. All these things that conservatives want, like, or are against, like homeschooling. They want school vouchers for homeschooling for the most part. Or those of us that expound living a godly life as much as possible, as holy a life as possible, or this, that, or the other. People are going to be forced into these things finally. Not by any action of any conservatives or people like us. Circumstances are going to force them to.
Want to know my next big prediction?
Huh.
There's going to be an Ebola vaccine that is going to be mandatory. And if you don't take the vaccine, you'll be herded with the other people into quarantine areas, call them what you will, where unvaccinated people are kept away from the public at large.
And the fact that no one dies is not going to be released to the public.
That's just a Kevin Mitchell prediction. I'm not saying...
Do you have any inside knowledge?
I just know... I know how government works.
Yep. It's done incrementally.
I was listening to a talk show the other day where one of the guys, young guy, was at a drugstore and there was a nurse pushing the flu shot. And he said, no, I don't want the flu shot. And she basically started guilting him into that. You know, you're going to get other people sick, blah, 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 blah. And that was just a flu shot.
See, I have no choice. I have to get a flu shot because of where I work.
That's why I have the perfect job. I'm self-employed, have no boss, nobody
unless I
tell me
can
what to do.
prove a religious objection to it or a health objection to it. And I can't prove either.
Well, I don't know.
Maybe I should become Jehovah's Witness. Then I could prove a health or religious objection.
Well, think about this. You know people who have had this flu shot. Some people get minor, sometimes major flu symptoms from it.
I got some minor ones last year from it.
Sometimes people get outright sick from it.
For a day or two, I just didn't feel right.
Now, if you can catch the flu from the flu shot, what about the Ebola shot? I don't know. Do we know anything? This is new. This is uncharted water.
Yep.
But I know.
Absolutely.
But I know. Now, you're going to hold on to your hats on this one. I know this is perfect end of times disease. It's right out of the Bible, man.
Yep.
Horrific.
I mean, you don't believe us, folks? Just look around you. Take some time away from your freaking American Idol, Dancing with the Stars, your damn music, like your hip hop, your rap, your it's Friday, that kind of stuff. Take time away from posting your pictures of your food on your Facebook page. And read and look at things that really matter. And
if you're 50 years old or older and still celebrating birthday week, you need to grow up. Sorry. I get tired of these grown people sitting there throwing these elaborate parties for themselves that last, all week long.
Kevin's birthday was last Friday. You know what we did? The family went out to the bar that he goes out to, hung out, had some drinks, listened to some music, talked, had some burgers and fries. And it was forgotten.
That's birthday.
Because when you get to be over 50, you want to forget your birthday. Anyway, folks, that's all we got for today. I'm sure, I have no doubt, I would stake my life on the fact that we'll have plenty to talk about next week.
Prediction? There'll be another positive test for Ebola.
Yep. And
that's not a hard prediction to make.
I would venture to say that one of the two that have it now might die.
It's sad.
They're trying to paint a smiley face on it as they can. But.
Oh, real quick, did you see her being loaded on the plane and the one guy that wasn't in the hazmat outfit?
What was that guy who was supposedly worked for the CDC, right?
Well, he's supposed to direct the people in the hazmat attire because they can't see very well with all that stuff on.
So he's got to be without it so he can see. Whatever. He's an alien from another planet. He's immune to it. He's immune to it because he's from another planet. All right, folks. We will see you next week. Bye-bye.
See ya.